Welcome, everyone. Happy Earth Day. And thank you for joining our webinar today with WFAN. As a reminder, this session is recorded, so please mute your mics if you are not speaking and save your questions until the end of the presentation, as we have allotted time for Q&A with our speaker. This session is part 2 of our 5-part spring series with WFAN in partnership with the City of Cedar Rapids. My name is Olivia Flannery, and I am the program assistant with WFAN's Women Caring for the Land program, and serving as your facilitator today on our educational webinar titled Keeping the Weeds at Bay, Invasive Plant ID and Control. This session will focus on plants commonly found across the Midwest, and we are excited to have our host, Erin Hosto, as our guest speaker. Erin will be leading an upcoming session, May 9th, an in-person chainsaw class in Hiawatha, Iowa, that is focused on equipment safety and brush control techniques. Registration is open for that, so please visit wfan.org to register, and there are limited spots available. My colleague Jennifer will be capturing references that are discussed throughout the presentation in the chat, and we will post them on our WFAN resources page for your future reference. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Erin Hosto. Erin is our tall grass prairie enthusiast who has been active in the field for the last 5 years. Upon graduating from Cornell College in 2021 with a bachelor's degree in biology and environmental studies, she got her start in land stewardship with a summer internship at Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation. From there, she spent 2 years serving as an AmeriCorps member with the Burr Oak Land Trust in Iowa City, where she grew confident in her Sawyer abilities and learned about prescribed fire, woodland, prairie management, and habitat monitoring. She currently works with EOC Environmental Group Restoration Department, where she has been honing her skills for the last 3 years. At EOC, she conducts land management in the form of prairie seeding, tree planting, invasive species management, prescribed fire, habitat monitoring, and much more for clients all across Iowa. Before we have Erin kick off her presentation, we'd like to know a little bit about you guys who are in the audience. So if you could please provide in the chat your background of how you identify yourself, where you're joining in from, and what you're excited to learn about today. So I'll give you guys just a couple minutes for that, and I'll have Erin get ready for her presentation when she is ready. That's all for me.
Can you see that okay?
Looks good, Erin.
I'll give a couple more seconds and I'll launch into it. So I'll dive right in as everybody's kind of leaving in their introductions. So my name is Erin Hosto. Like Olivia said, I am the environmental scientist at EOC Environmental Group. And yeah, I've been doing this for the past 5 years, kind of live and breathe invasive species control. So I'm pretty familiar with invasive species around Iowa and how to control them. So I will be focusing on Iowa species at the moment. But yeah, as well as entering like maybe introductions, if you also have any like pests or invasive species or weeds that you commonly deal with, I'd be happy to know about that. So if you want to leave that in the chat as well throughout the presentation, I'd be happy to read something like that. Yeah, so I'll also give like just a bit of an organization in how I'm giving this presentation. I'm going to start with exactly like the definition of invasive species, give a couple of examples, talk about why they're important to understand and control, and then dive more deeply into like methods of control and then how to specifically ID some certain plants. And because I'll be leading like a chainsaw training later on, I'm going to focus primarily on woody species, woody invasive species, but I will kind of run through like herbaceous, more herbaceous invasive species as well. But that'll be my focus. Yeah, so I'll dive right in. See here. Here we go. So I'm going to plug my company really quick and then talk about more what I do. So again, I work for EOC Environmental Group. We are countrywide. We operate all over the US, but my little corner is in Iowa, and our department, we do watershed engineering, wetland and threatened endangered species monitoring and mitigation. We do archaeology, architectural history, cultural resources surveying and monitoring. And then specifically what I do with my crew of three, we do habitat restoration, like Olivia said, invasive species removal, tree plugs and planting, prairie seeding and establishment, prescribed fire, monitoring and consulting. And we have clients anywhere from private landowners to state, county agencies, like we work with Iowa City Parks and Rec to manage some of their woodlands. We work with also larger organizations like Goodwill. Goodwill wanted a prairie in one of their headquarter areas in Cedar Rapids, Goodwill Heartlands. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but we're currently establishing a prairie there. Corteva as well. They used to be Pioneer, now Corteva at their headquarters in Johnston. We've done like a large tree planting and are currently establishing a prairie for them. Yeah, so I just have some pictures here at the bottom of us in our yellows and greens for burning. We're currently reaching the end of our bird season right now. That's been super fun. But yeah, we do like aquatic plug plantings like we've been doing here, tree plantings, and then my colleague here in the tractor, she's doing some seeding. And then I'll just show you a quick picture. I thought this was a kind of a nice comparison on the prairies that we establish, that we restore. So this was an alfalfa field back in 2020, I think, 2021. This area had been farmed for decades, but we seeded it in 2021, and it currently, this was last year, 2025 growing season. That's what this area looks like now. And just for reference, this is a house right here, and that's the same house. So kind of that same hill slope. But yeah, just kind of a slice of what we do. But I've been doing this for 5 years, and no invasive species in this area pretty well, I would say. So I'll jump right into it now. And I'll start with an example of an invasive species before I give like a specific definition. Many of you might be familiar with kudzu. Kudzu is a plant, a viney plant from Japan. It was introduced from Japan, I think as an ornamental, probably also as erosion control. It's also an edible plant, but it was introduced to the southern US, so like Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri. And it has absolutely exploded, as many of you might know. You can see in this picture too, it just takes over everything. It's just one plant. We call this a monoculture. So it kills anything underneath this, and even the trees. It'll grow up around the trees and kill those as well. This is such a great example of an invasive species, the one that totally dominates its environment and causes harm. That's as far as I'll talk about kudzu, because it's not in Iowa, so I'm not as familiar with ID or control. But I just thought that this would be a very good example because most people are probably familiar with kudzu. But I will give a formal definition. This is like the legal definition of an invasive species. It's a non-native species that causes economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. So again, in my eyes, as a habitat restoration or land manager, I see an invasive species as something as a plant that totally dominates an environment. I talk plants. This can also be insects, animals, but this is plant specific, so I'll be talking about plants. And specifically non-native invasive species, non-native plants specifically, are those that are introduced to an area, whether accidentally or directly by humans. And again, it dominates their particular habitat. So I'll just jump into a couple of quick examples here. I will go into more into all of these examples later on into the presentation. But just quickly, you can kind of see these pictures, how they really take over the environment that they're in. These are all invasive species to Iowa. You've got your Amur honeysuckle specifically, but there are other species of honeysuckle that are invasive. This is a picture from my company, or that one of the people in my company took, of honeysuckle that's really taking over the understory of this woodland. This is a picture of oriental bittersweet, or excuse me, brownleaf bittersweet. It used to be called oriental, but we call it brownleaf bittersweet now. Again, this is my least favorite invasive. I think it's a viney plant, really takes over. It can really kill trees. The vines can girdle and kill trees. They can also overgrow the trees and really take over, grow a thick mat, take over an area. You've got crown vetch here, this purple, pinkish, whitish plant. If you're driving along I-80 in Iowa during like June, July, you'll probably see like a huge mat of bright green, purple flowers. And that's probably crown vetch that you're seeing. Um, so all three of these at the top, these three pictures that I just went over, all these plants were introduced uh, not accidentally, but like directly from Asia and Europe. I think honeysuckle, brownleaf bittersweet, those are from Asia, and then crown vetch was from Europe, I think, if I remember correctly. So these are from overseas. These bottom two examples, however, are actually from parts of the US. So we have here black locust. This is native to a region in I think Appalachia and then parts of Missouri, Arkansas, and I'm blanking now. I think Mississippi. So this was kind of more. This was native to like eastern United States and kind of southern United States, but it has been introduced in Iowa. It was not naturally occurring before European colonization, but it was introduced for like fence use for like hedgerows, fence posts, stuff like that. Same with Osage orange. It was introduced for the same reason, but did not exist before European settlement in Iowa. This is actually from a small, Osage orange is from a small region in Texas and I think Oklahoma as well. So yeah, non-native species can come from overseas, but they can also come from like parts of the country. But if they're introduced to a particular area that they weren't in before, they can be considered non-native. As well as non-native, we also have native invasive species. Now, this isn't formally addressed in the U.S. executive order, but there are native species that can fully dominate an environment that we work with every day to control. And can be for multiple reasons. This can be because of manipulation of habitat due to fire suppression is one. The United States, prior to European colonization, was fire adapted. So wildfires happened all the time, whether that was lit by lightning or because of indigenous practices. But since European colonization, fire has mostly been stopped throughout the country. And because of that, shrubs and trees have really kind of taken over the landscape. Native invasive species, they're naturally occurring. And again, they dominate in particular habitat. And some examples of this are gray dogwood, kind of in the back here. Again, native to Iowa and really becoming a problem for prairies. And then another one, many of you might know this one if you have like more of an aquatic wetland environment that you work in. This is reed canary grass. It's really, really aggressive. By the way, can you see my mouse, my pointer? Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Okay, great. I've been using that a lot. Thank you. So reed canary grass, extremely aggressive, very hard to control. If you have land that you're trying to manage near a waterway, unfortunately, reed canary grass is nearly impossible to control because water, like rivers, creeks, can distribute seeds from upstream onto the seed bank. So you have to kind of continually control that seed bank. Very difficult, kind of a land manager's nightmare. But it is a native plant. It was hybridized with a variant from, I think, China. And it was also planted as a form of erosion control pretty widely in this area. Yeah, two examples of native but invasive species. So now I want to talk about why it's important. So I often see native fauna enjoying non-native invasive species. So an example is honeysuckle. Honeysuckle produces these bright red berries that birds like robins and blue jays and cedar waxwings love and will unfortunately disperse after they eat. And also crown vetch. I this kind of bugs me, but I see bumblebees all the time on crown vetch when they bloom. They really really love it. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality. So a lot of our native species do use invasive species. So if they use them, especially like bumblebees, they're very important. So are songbirds, they're federally protected. Why do we want to take these away? Why do we want to control these invasive species? And the biggest reason is for biodiversity in general. Usually, biodiversity, more plants, more species that are available in a habitat just means it's a more healthy and productive ecosystem. But to give more of a specific example, a plant like honeysuckle cannot support a whole range of birds, right? So I gave you examples of like robins, cedar waxwings, cardinals also, they all love honeysuckle berries. But those are pretty common birds that we'll find in urban environments. I did not mention species like dick thistle or oriental, Baltimore oriole. And there's a couple of others I can't think of right now, but dick thistle, Baltimore oriole, those species, they need grass, they need other types of native berries to support themselves. They won't eat honeysuckle berries. Same with pollinators. Not all species of like wasps or ants or even like small rodents that use birds for foraging and pollinating, um, they will not all utilize like species like crown vetch, right? Um, so we'll kind of get into like the terms generalist species and a specialist species. So generalist, again, this is like your robin, your blue jays. They will forage on multiple different types of um, host plants, right? So like honeysuckle berries or crown vetch. Like bumblebees, they like their crown vetch. They also like other plants like milkweed or like spiderwort or any range of plants, spring ephemerals. But then you have your specialist species, and I think the hallmark for this is the monarch butterfly. Many of us are probably familiar with this example. They lay eggs exclusively on species of milkweed, and their caterpillars eat exclusively milkweed. So if we have species like crown vetch entirely dominating an environment that could be a prairie that could host milkweed, then there's no habitat and no support for monarch butterflies. So there goes that habitat. This is the same for honeysuckle actually too. If we have honeysuckle that fully dominates an understory of a forest, then we aren't able to have species like spring ephemerals. So spring ephemerals are wildflowers in Iowa that only come up for like 2 to 3 weeks per year. They're in full bloom right now. If you go to a well-managed woodland, you'll find a lot of wildflowers. They're so pretty. Queen bumblebees, like including like the federally endangered rusty patch bumblebee, they need these spring ephemerals to survive. This is like the first source of pollen and nectar that they will get. So when they come out of hibernation, they will utilize these spring ephemerals, and then they have their energy to start their colony then for the growing season. So if we have honeysuckle completely dominating an understory of a woodland where these spring ephemerals are naturally, you know, native to growing, then it totally blocks out sunlight for spring ephemerals to grow. So that eliminates a whole habitat for bumblebees, basically. And so now bumblebees can't go and start their colony, including like that endangered rusty patch bumblebee. So this is why it's important. It takes a lot of effort to remove these invasive species, but it is very, very important to encourage habitat for a whole range of species, whether that be plant or animal or insect or fungal or whatever. And also just for aesthetic purposes as well. I love seeing spring ephemerals. It makes me so happy. I'm sure it makes everybody really happy to see a wide variety of flowers and insects and plants and birds, and all of that. So it's really for an aesthetic reason as well. We need to remove these plants. Okay, pop quiz.
All right, there should be a poll that popped up. Did you see it? All right, we're getting some answers. All right, so the question is, what are traits of non-native invasive species? All right, give another couple seconds for people to reply. All right. Think everyone got this answer right. Does somebody want to come on, Mike, and share what the correct answer is?
I can go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. So it's the first answer. So causes economic, environmental harm or harm to human health. So good job. I think we got 100% correct.
All right. And did I stop sharing? Okay, I think we're good. Oh, you're muted.
My bad. So now I'm going to hop into methods of control quickly before we actually get into the formal IDing. Yeah, so we'll go over biological control, mechanical control, and chemical control.
Here, you muted yourself again. Sorry.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm pressing my space bar. So there are multiple ways to go about biological and cultural control. Some of the main ways I utilize in my job that we utilize here at USC, prescribed fire. Again, we're in the middle of our prescribed fire season. This is great to encourage diversity of native grass species, and of course native fords as well, but primarily grasses. The nitrogen from burning a prairie really encourages native grasses to flourish. Along with that, it also discourages sapling shrubs and woody encroachment. So fire is a great way to reduce species like honeysuckle and multiflora rose and like locust from getting new prairie, or really any woody species that you don't want in your prairie. Fire is a really good way to control that. And it's really cool. It's fun to do. We also have altering your habitat or your environment to kind of restrict growth. So here we kind of have that same picture I showed earlier. This is reed canary grass in the same area that I showed earlier. And reed canary grass does not tolerate shade very well. So a really good way to combat an invasive reed canary problem is to plant trees. So it's kind of hard to see here because there's a ton of green, but this here is a button bush. I think it's button bush, a shrub that we planted. We planted a bunch back in this area. This is the Willow Creek headwaters area here. And so we planted some shrubs. Obviously, this isn't going to do much in the first couple of years. So what we have to do when we plant these trees is to make sure that the reed canary isn't growing up and over these trees and kind of restricting growth that way. But in 5 to 10 years, hopefully these trees will go large enough to cast shade over the area and kill the plants. So that's one way to do it. Another way, this is not a method that we use at UC, and I'm not the biggest fan of this, but I'm also not a huge expert in this, but you can introduce pests to an environment. And so an example that a lot of people might be familiar with is like Asian lady beetles. I think Asian lady beetles were introduced in the US to control the aphid population for crops. And then they became an invasive problem as well. So that's kind of the reason why I'm not the biggest fan of this, but I'm sure there are like great, and I know there are great examples out there of using pests to control your environment. So here, this example, this is garlic mustard. This is a spring weed. Right now it's in full bloom. You can go out to your woodlands and see it just fully dominate your understory. It's garlic mustard, and these are garlic mustard weevils, and I think they've been recently introduced, but these prey exclusively on garlic mustard. Again, there's that term specialist. This is a specialist species. They only eat garlic mustard. And at this point in time, I haven't seen very many effects from garlic mustard weevil on garlic mustard, in that I haven't seen them like effectively control a population just yet, but I have seen effects of weevils eating garlic mustard. They do kill the plant, but it's just not widespread enough, I think, to really control that population. But I could be wrong on that aspect. It's not something I am very familiar in at the moment. So that is biological and cultural control. There are many other examples of this, but here's kind of a brief overview. Again, we have mechanical removal. This is important again for our next session where we're using chainsaws. We use mechanical removal to usually to control woody species, but you can also do this for like weeding and hand pulling. So again, garlic mustard, like I mentioned earlier, as a small herbaceous weed, you can really easily pull that up and fully kill it. But when you do that, you have to make sure that if these garlic mustard, when you're pulling them, if they have seeds already developing, you need to put them in a garbage bag and throw them in the landfill, because they can, if you just drop them on the ground, those seeds will get into the ground and sprout in the next year. So if you're weeding and hand pulling, you might want to utilize like a garbage bag or a bucket and throw those plants that you're weeding into the landfill when you're done. You can also mow. And here my colleague is using our tractor to mow an establishing prairie that was seeded a couple years ago. You might be able to see here, there's a species called sow thistle that we're trying to control in this prairie. This thistle is a biennial plant, which means that it persists for 2 years. So the first year it'll grow like a basil, like rosette, to get energy to grow its roots. And then it'll go dormant, but the roots will, over the winter, but the roots will remain alive. And then the next year it'll sprout a flower, and that flower will then make seeds and then disperse the seeds. But a good way to manage this, especially in a large population, is if you just restrict that. If you stop that seed head from developing, if you cut it off, then it won't seed. So you can let that plant grow for 2 years, stop the seed, and then it'll die. You'll have to do this for a couple of years, because if you're in an environment where something like garlic mustard or sow thistle has been invasive for plenty of years, it's going to have a pretty big seed bank. It's going to have a lot of seeds in there. So you probably have to do this for multiple years, but eventually you will be able to control that population. So mowing is a good way to do this. There's also a method called tarping. This method is good for like grass species, species of grass, or species of plants that grow rhizomatously. And I'll get into that term later on in the presentation, but rhizomatous plants are basically those that utilize their roots to spread and grow new shoots above ground, I guess. So grass is a really good example of this, like your lawn, your turf grass. Even though you're mowing it, you're not allowing those seeds to form in your turf grass. It's still growing. You're still like, your lawn is still surviving somehow, right? And that's because it's using its roots to rhizomatously create more grasses, I guess, to grow. So in order to mechanically reduce this, you can pull it, but that takes a very long time. You can also tarp it. So really throwing a tarp over like an area of grass will block it from being able to get energy from the sun to photosynthesize, and then you'll kill it. This is a method that is good if you have like a small population to control, but really anything over like half an acre, if you have like a larger problem with smooth brome, reed hanger grass, anything like that, you're probably going to want to use other methods that I'll get into in the next slide. But if you have like a small, less than half an acre to kill, tarping is a pretty good method. And then finally, you have brush clearing. And again, this is these top two pictures here, my colleague Claire in both of them. In one, she's using a chainsaw to clear honeysuckle. You can kind of see, if you're familiar with honeysuckle, you can see these are the large stumps from that. And then she's also using a brush cutter here to remove species of willow and cottonwood. And I didn't mention that earlier, but sometimes in more wetland environments, willow and cottonwood can be a little aggressive. So what we're doing here is we're cutting this to reduce its spread. And then you can also use loppers and handsaws. If you're not comfortable with using chainsaws or brush cutters, that's totally fine. Loppers and handsaws are a really great alternative. It's hard to see here, but my colleague she's holding a pair of loppers. She's patrolling this prairie to make sure that she is cutting down any black locusts that she sees in this prairie. So any of these are very good methods to mechanically control plants. However, I will say with brush clearing, cutting them to the stump is not enough, because they will resprout. So you can come back year to year and continue to cut those resprouts, but it does get harder because that the wood the wood dies, and when it dies, it gets denser in the middle, and then those sprouts come up around that like center stump. So the more resprouts that you kill, it'll like grow a larger root mass at the bottom. Essentially, it just gets kind of harder to cut through, and eventually, if you're using loppers might not be an effective method after a while. So we'll get into maybe a way to go along with mechanical treatment now. So chemical control. This is a little bit contentious, and I fully understand. A lot of people might not like this topic, and I totally get it. But we'll go through it. Please bear with me. um, and the reason I should jump into it and say that, the reason why chemical herbicide, many of you know, is contentious is that, it can cause environmental and human harm. Glyphosate specifically, a lot of people might know this chemical. The brand name of this is Roundup. It's linked to, not proven, but it's linked to causing cancers, specifically, what is it, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, I think. And it also, the amount of glyphosate specifically that's used in Iowa does create a lot of nitrates in the water. And it also, herbicide is also linked to the reduction of bee populations as well. So chemicals can be very harmful to use in the environment. And yeah, that's why I'm using this disclaimer. However, I have to say, and this is awful, but it is a necessary evil, kind of like, how you gotta, like, driving a car, that's maybe contributing to climate change, but you gotta get to work, you gotta get to, wherever you're going, especially if you live in a rural area. Like, I drive my car into work every day. I hate it, but that's just the reality until we find a better solution, like electric cars, right? The invasive species, like, take over. There's just so many invasive species to control out there. Chemical control is kind of a necessary evil, especially if you're a land manager, if you're managing multiple acres, like we do. We do use chemicals. So with that, there are multiple types of applications that you can use. What we use in our job are cut stump. So like I said earlier, you can remove things like honeysuckle down to the stump, but they will resprout. So the best way you can control this is by using herbicide and putting it around the cambium layer, or on the cambium layer of the living tissue of a stump. So this right here, this is a sponge tip applicator. So this is like a vessel this is like a 4-ounce container we have glyphosate in here. And then there's a sponge tip at the top if you remove this cap, and you can dab it onto the surface. And this is my favorite way of using herbicide because it is extremely controlled and it's pretty safe. It won't dribble down the stump. It won't really get into the soil at all, as long as you use it effectively and kind of maintain this contraption right here. And again, this is called Buckthorn Blaster. This is the brand name, but I think there are other sponge tip applicators on the market. This is a very beginner friendly way to administer herbicide. So if you're interested in managing your land and you have woodlands that you need to manage, if you want to use chemical, I would recommend getting a sponge tip applicator. We also have foliar spray, which is what my colleague and I are doing here. We've got herbicide diluted with a lot of water in these backpacks, and we are spraying crown vetch in this prairie. This is a way to, this is a pretty quick way to remove herbaceous and smaller shrubby species. So it's a good way to kind of chemically control smaller shrubs and herbaceous species. It does cause, if you use it improperly, it can cause off-target drift. So you really need to follow the label when you're doing this. You need to be careful. This is maybe a method for more experienced people to be using. So if you're doing foliar spray, you have to be careful making sure you're targeting only the plant that you want to kill. Basil bark is another example of an application. So basil bark is only used for woody species. And it's when you mix an ester-based herbicide, an herbicide that is soluble in oil. So we usually use a broadleaf herbicide called triclopyr, and you mix it with either, you can use it with a vegetative oil, or we usually use diesel. I think a lot of land managers use diesel. And you spray it in a ring around a stump of a tree, and the stump has to be 6 inches in diameter or smaller. If it's any larger than that, this won't work. But you usually do this in the winter, and the stump will absorb the oils and the chemical through the bark. and it'll go into the roots. And that's a way to kill it too. Again, like foliar spray, this is a way, if you don't do it under the correct conditions and in the proper manner, this can cause off-target drift. So you just have to make sure you're being careful with this. It's also a method that people use if their outbreak is very, very thick. Like if you have just a ton of honeysuckle and it's going to cause, you're going to need a lot of time and a lot of manpower to remove it. Basil bark is a good way to just kill it, and not having to, you don't have to remove the honeysuckle at all. Using a chainsaw, you can just kill the plant. It's pretty quick. But yeah, so I'll just jump into safety considerations really quick. Again, herbicide, you need to be safe when you're using it, right? So first things first, read the label. Please read the label anytime you're getting an herbicide. They will come with a label, instructions on use, instructions on proper personal protective equipment you need to wear. We'll also talk about the right weather conditions to apply it in and the right conditions, like environment, to apply it in as well. So in general, you never want to apply herbicide when it's raining out or precipitating, because if on freshly applied herbicide, that rain can just wash it away and, you know, wash it off to off target species or into like a body of water, right? And then there goes that herbicide into the environment and it's not being used where it properly should be, right? There's also like certain temperature ranges required according to each herbicide. So you need to read the label on that. Like basil bark, for specific chemicals, you can't use it above like 60 degrees or else it'll evaporate. That can be pretty bad too. So yes, please read the label, and please use the appropriate PPE according to the label. Again, they will list that on the label of each herbicide. But in general, if you're using herbicide, you really should have safety glasses on. You should have long sleeves, long pants, nitrile or latex gloves. Nitrile gloves are really good, and rubber boots. If you're using your buckthorn blaster, you might not necessarily need rubber boots, but at least like a closed-toed shoe. And make sure you're cleaning your clothes pretty good after you use it, right? And the label also has directions on how to properly dispose of your herbicide container and your herbicide when you're done with it. And one last thing, do not use herbicide if you're pregnant, please, or if you have respiratory issues. Herbicide is known to cause birth defects. Yeah, so please do not use it if you're pregnant. So now I'll get into a little bit more of like specific herbicides. I won't go over all of them. I'll just go over some of the ones that we use and that are most commonly used in land management. We have triclopyr and clethodim. These are herbicides that specifically target certain types of plants. So triclopyr, like I mentioned earlier, you can use that in your basil bark formulations. They're useful for woody species as well as broadleaf species. So that means like vines, forbs or flowers, things like that. You can't use them for grasses. So if you have like a crown vetch outbreak in the middle of a bunch of native Indian grass and big blue stem, and you don't want to kill that Indian grass or big blue stem, you can use triclopyr foliar spray and you will just kill that crown vetch. It's pretty cool how it doesn't like, you know, kill the grasses. Same with clethodim, but like opposite this time, clethodim is grass specific. So you can use that for your wreath canary outbreaks or for like smooth brome or something like that. And it won't kill your broadleaf. So your forbs, your flowers, or your like woody species or vines or anything like that. Clethodim is pretty smelly though. So if you use that, just make it be known. It stinks. Oops. And then you have broad spectrum herbicides. So again, you might all be familiar with glyphosate or Roundup. This will kill anything. And the mode of action for glyphosate is it specifically binds an enzyme that goes into photosynthesis. And I kind of forget the science on it. It's been quite a while since I've taken a biology class, but so glyphosate specifically kind of stops photosynthesis from happening. So that is one we use very often. And I think a lot of people use it. And the reason why glyphosate is so contentious, a lot of people hear it, is that there are a lot of people out there who don't use glyphosate according to the label, and they use it like they use way too much of it, right? So if you use it in the right amount and according to the label, it is actually one of the least harmful herbicides out there. surprisingly, maybe ironically, I don't know. It's shown to have the least persistence in the environment as compared to things like triclopyr, clethodim, um, and aminopyrrolate, other chemicals like that. And also, when it hits the ground, when it like gets into the soil, it can there's a specific word for it. I kind of forget it now, but it disassociates, so the active ingredient is no longer active. But that being said, glyphosate, it's used all over Iowa. It's used not according to the label, and that creates harm. It has created harm. So that's glyphosate. Another one, a broad spectrum herbicide, one that can kill anything, is picloram, or I think Tordon is a brand name for it. You might have heard this one. This was common, I think, before glyphosate hit the market, before glyphosate was synthesized. Please do not use picloram or Tordon. It is very harmful. It will cause off-target effects. It does get into the soil, and it will kill through the roots other plants. So I've seen this happen a lot of times where people use Tordon on some plants next to like an oak tree. So they're not specifically like spraying the oak tree, but because they're spraying plants next to the oak tree, Tordon will get into the roots of that oak tree eventually and cause something called oak leaf tatter, which it just messes up the growth development of oak leaves. So they make them really small, and then they can't effectively like photosynthesize, right? So I think for a lot of federal agencies now, like they restrict the use of picloram or Tordon. So if you have this, please don't use it. But yeah, that's my PSA. And that's kind of the end of my herbicide talk. And time for another pop quiz.
All right, and I will go ahead and share the results now. I think everyone was right. Good job paying attention.
Good job, everyone. Okay, now we're going to get into the ID portion of this. So I'm going to specifically go over invasive plants that are invasive to Iowa. So if I don't mention some that are very invasive to you, please let me know. I'd love to hear about it. But I'm specifically going to go over some invasive Iowa plants. I'll go over shrubs, then trees, then quickly some herbaceous species. Okay, so we'll get into it. Bush honeysuckle. I've mentioned it before. Again, many of you might have heard of this. It's one of the first shrubs. It's an understory tree, one of the first shrubs to green up, to have leaves in the spring, and one of the last trees to go dormant in the fall. So right now is probably a good time to actually see honeysuckle in the woodlands. You go out, most of the trees are still blooming their flowers or just starting to create their leaf buds, but honeysuckle is fully leafed out already. It's very green. So if you go into any park that isn't super well managed, you'll probably see honeysuckle all greened out already. I mean, you can see it in these bottom two pictures here. Sorry, they're a little grainy, but you can kind of see the snow cover here. The honeysuckle is still green. Same with here. There's not many leaves in the trees right now in this picture, but that honeysuckle is still green. And that's a way that it like inhibits sunlight from reaching the ground, because it starts leafing out so early and dies so late in the season. That's a way that makes it so invasive. It has a very long growing season, so it can grow pretty quickly. And yeah, blocks that sunlight to the understory. And so some ID tips for you. These leaves are kind of like pretty general. They've got this, we call it a simple leaf margin or a smooth leaf margin here, and ovate leaves. So it's kind of a rounded bottom that ends with a pointed tip. Um, they're very light leaves. They're pretty like, they're not very coarse. They're kind of smooth, and they're very thin. They produce these bright red berries in late summer, and in late fall, early summer, they produce these. Sometimes they're white, sometimes they're pink, depending on the species. And they do smell good. Like, I'm sure you've heard of the scent of honeysuckle. Like, it does smell pretty good, unfortunately. Um, a hallmark of honeysuckle is that it has a hollow stem. So if you break off, cut open a branch, like a small branch or a twig of a honeysuckle, you'll probably see this hollow stem here. I had a friend who one time when in the field, he was during lunch, he like took a branch of honeysuckle and started making a whistle out of it. And he was successful. He was able to make or it was like a flute. I think he made like a archaic flute out of it. Yeah, so another way you can differentiate honeysuckle from other species is its bark. And might be kind of hard to see, but it has kind of a whitish, pale, striated bark, and it's also pretty shaggy, so it kind of peels a little bit. And I didn't mention there are multiple species of bush honeysuckle invasive to Iowa. Um, and they were brought over from Asia for ornamental and reforestation purposes. I think it was like in the 70s. The foresters recommended that people plant honeysuckle for habitat purposes and to reforest disturbed areas because they didn't know at the time that it would be so invasive. So that's kind of why it was established in Iowa, was for those reasons. And unfortunately, it's a big problem now. On kind of a flip side of that is gray dogwood. Again, I mentioned earlier, it is a native species, but it is aggressive. And I think that these are lookalikes. If you're not familiar with these two species, it's going to be hard to differentiate between the two because they grow in the same habitat and they both kind of have a similar leaf structure, but we'll kind of go through the differences. So I think the biggest one here is the flowering. So honeysuckle, they have large flowers, and there's only a couple, but dogwood has these florets, and they kind of have like what they call like a raceme. So it has like a red branching structure that puts up all these flowers. And these actually, you can kind of see it here. This is a very grainy picture, but this little like raceme here, or you can see it up here too. It holds on even through the winter. So these little red structures here, you can see them at the end of like a twig, and they will hold on throughout the winter. So that is kind of a way sometimes I will be able to identify dogwood, is because of these like red branching structures here that hold on to the flowers and to the berries. The berries are these whitish fleshy fruits with pits in the middle. Birds love them just like they love honeysuckle. And the leaves are they're pretty similar to honeysuckle, but they have like a wavy leaf margin here. You might be able to kind of see it in this picture. It's not smooth like the honeysuckle. It's a bit wavy. And the underside is kind of a silvery color. And dogwood leaves are kind of coarse in texture as compared to honeysuckle. It's kind of smooth. Dogwood are pretty coarse. And a really good way, if it's leafing out, if you're in the middle of spring or summer, a really good way to differentiate is if you take a dogwood leaf and you slowly pull it apart, there's these strings that come out of the leaf. It's almost like, like cheese pull, you pull apart like mozzarella cheese and you got the strings. It's less stringy, obviously, but there are strings that kind of come out if you slowly pull it apart. That's not the same for honeysuckle. It'll just unsatisfyingly rip apart. But that's a way a friend told me that you could distinguish between the two. Some other species, multiflora rose. Many of you probably know this and hate it. This is my second least favorite species because they hurt. They're very thorny. You can see this here. They also grow. I don't have a good picture of a habit of it, but they're large. They grow in large bushes, and they've got these long branches, I guess. And with the thorns, if you get into like a honeysuckle bush, it can like branch over your shoulder and like grab onto you basically, and so it's kind of hard to shimmy your way out. They really hurt. I don't like managing them because they get through even like denim. The thorns can get through denim and poke your legs. My legs look crazy in the summer after dealing with these. Oh, I forgot to, yeah, anyway, sorry. Multiflora rose, they were brought from Asia for ornamental and reforestation purposes, just like honeysuckle. And for the same reason too, right? They were planted in the 70s. People encouraged them to plant to reforest their habitat, to create habitat for fauna. They have these really white, really kind of nice looking flowers, and you might recognize that they're pretty similar to like apple or cherry or crabapple blooms. And that's because they're actually in the same plant family. Multiflora rose, apples, crabapples, cherries, they're all in that Rosaceae plant family. So the flowers look pretty similar. Um, and they also have these leaflets here. So they don't have just one leaf, they have leaflets. And they also have these little red rose hips, and these are edible. They're actually full of vitamin C, and you can use them in tea, and they taste pretty good. And you get your daily dose of vitamin C from that. But kind of the biggest tell for these is their thorns. Like they're just thorny. They're not pleasant to be around. There is a native version of rose in Iowa. It's actually the state flower. Um, there's actually different species. I don't think the species is the state Iowa state rose is like specified. It's just like a genus, but the difference between the multiflora rose and the native rose is that the multiflora rose is a bush, and the native rose is just like one small little flower that you'll find in like a grassland. So multiflora rose, it's a lot bigger and harder to handle. So then you have autumn olive, and again, this was introduced from Asia for erosion control and reforestation. Unfortunately, I think this plant is really pretty. I understand why it was planted for ornamental reasons, but it is hard to control. I don't think it's as bad. I haven't seen it as problematic as honeysuckle, but I'm sure it's different in different places. I think like McBride, there are some spots where it's pretty invasive, and they're working to control that. But it's pretty similar. Like the leaves are pretty similar to dogwood. They sometimes have this wavy leaf margin, kind of that green leaf as well, and red berries. They're very sparkly. Um, the distinguishing factor for me though here is that just how sparkly this plant is. So if you flip over the leaf to the underside, it's very shiny. It's very pretty, and the bark is as well as the berries as well, like very shimmery and shiny. It's a pretty interesting plant. And I will say too that the berries are edible. They taste pretty fruity, so you can eat them if you see them. Just make sure to don't spit out the pit in the ground, like throw it away, so you don't create that seed bank. And here's just a picture of its invasive quality here. It really taken over that understory just like honeysuckle can. Japanese barberry. This is an ornamental introduced from Japan. A lot of people still use this in landscaping. Actually, my parents for a while, they had a barberry in their front lawn. They don't anymore, thank goodness, but you can still see this in landscaping. They've got these bright green clusters of leaves. It's kind of a clustered whorl. And they're kind of pokey. You can see maybe a thorn here, maybe some thorns around, but if you touch it, they're pretty pokey. They look pretty distinct from most other plants. So in my mind, they're relatively easy to identify, and they do create shrubs, but they're not very big. Like I think at most they come hip to chest height, really. But most of them I see are relatively small. And yeah, they create these red berries, and they get kind of a reddish color in the fall. But a pretty easy way to distinguish these guys is if you cut through a stem or cut into the living heartwood, the cambium layer of the branch or twig, it's like highlight or yellow. So if you like use your loppers and you cut off a branch and you look at the stump, it's like very, very brightly yellow. I will say one note about these, and this is data from a study by Penn State. They attract deer ticks. So if you're in an area that is pretty and heavily invaded by barberry, just beware. Please check yourself for ticks, because they attract deer ticks, and those are the ticks that do carry Lyme disease. So just be careful. And by the way, it's tick season. I've already gotten ticks, so just FYI, if you haven't seen ticks already, they're out. And then another one, burning bush. This again, ornamental from Northeast Asia and Central China. This is also still used in landscaping, but it's escaped cultivation. I see this all the time as a landscaping plant and as an invasive in the woods. It's also called winged wahoo, which I like that name better, but I think most people know it by burning bush. And it's called burning bush because it has very, very bright. It's pretty. It's actually really pretty. Very bright red foliage in the fall. The leaves are doubly serrated. And a good way to identify this in any season actually is its bark. It's got these really interesting ridges, kind of throughout the plant. It's super interesting. I'm fascinated by this tree just by its bark formation. It's very distinct, I think. I don't really think there's many other plants that look like this, but not in Iowa for sure. But yeah, the branching is pretty distinct on this. And again, this is like a look at how invasive it can be. Um, yeah. I will say just a note, I didn't really go over control on this, but again, a really good way to clear any of these that I just mentioned. You can hand pull them when they're small enough, but the bigger they get, the harder they are to hand pull. So then you can remove them with loppers, with chainsaws, with brush cutters, and then you will have to, if you're unwilling to go back year after year, you will have to control them with herbicide. You can use glyphosate, triclopyr. I'm sure there are other herbicides in the market that you can use as well. Yes. So now I'll jump into trees. And yeah, so this is European buckthorn. This is a pretty bad one in Minnesota specifically, I think, has a pretty bad issue with this. I know kind of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, they have a lot of buckthorn. And I think this is a noxious weed in Minnesota, but we also have this in Iowa City. You see this in some of the Iowa City parks. Yeah, least favorite. Yep. And yeah, so it has like a serrated leaf margin, and the veination on this is a little bit different from that of like dogwood, honeysuckle. It's a bit like feathery, I guess. It has thorns, which is why it's called buckthorn. It's got thorns at the end of its twigs, kind of between the leaf nodes. A good way to identify this one is by its shoot, I'm blanking on this, but there's these white spots all throughout the bark. And cherries also have this. They're little openings in the bark for gas transfer. Shoot, I wish I could remember the name because I'm blanking on it, but it looks kind of speckled almost. But yeah, a good way to identify it is by the white spots in the bark. Lenticels, thank you so much, lenticels. I knew one of you would say something, and I appreciate that. Yeah, so these have lenticels as well as cherries, but that's a good way to identify it. Also, if you're able to pull up the roots, or no, not the roots, if you cut a twig off of it, the heartwood is a bright orange color. And I don't have a picture of it here, but that's a good way to identify it as well, is that the heartwood is bright orange. It's got a bit of a shingly bark and blue, bright blue or dark blue berries. These berries are not edible. They're poisonous. Please don't eat them. And yeah, they're also an ornamental from Europe and Western Asia. White mulberry, not to be confused with red mulberry. Red mulberry is native to Iowa, but they're pretty rare. I don't think I've ever seen a red mulberry. White mulberry has very much taken over, and I think it sometimes also hybridizes with red mulberry. But many people might know this. This is a pretty delicious edible berry. You can find this in many disturbed spots, but it's pretty like junky. Near the bottom, there's always these like dead branches. This is actually a good example here. There's just like a dead stump here. There's always dead branches on this thing, on these trees. They're very messy looking. They're not very attractive looking trees. But their leaves are very interesting. They can either be unlobed or they could have lobes, and they're doubly serrated, and they're very glossy. They're thick, glossy leaves. But sometimes this like difference in lobed and unlobed, it can vary tree to tree. And even one tree itself could have any variation of this type of leaf. So sometimes it's hard to identify that way. If you cut the stump of it, it will exude this like white latex. So that's a way you can, if you like cut off a twig, it might exude that latex. So that's a way you can identify it. Also in I think July, around like early to mid July, usually it'll produce white or black berries. And they're edible. They're very, very sweet berries. They're like one of my favorites. They're really good. And yeah, so actually interesting about this too, this was brought over from China to establish the silk production industry in the US. I don't think it was necessarily successful, but that's just interesting. It was a host plant for the silkworm, so that's why it was brought over to the US. But it just persists today, probably because people like eating them. Okay. Siberian elm. This is not to be confused with the slippery red elm, which is native, as well as the American elm, which is also native. This is Siberian elm. The leaves are very elm-like. They look like an elm leaf, but they're a lot smaller than those American or slippery red elms. I wish I had a reference here, but the leaves are like, I don't know if you can see, like this big. But they're serrated. They have like an uneven, like where they meet at the bottom is uneven, and they've kind of got that ovate leaf shape. So round at the bottom, pointed at the top. They've got a pretty attractive tree canopy, kind of like a lot of like the native elms do as well. They're planted in a lot of cities because the canopy looks pretty attractive. But like mulberry, Siberian elms can be kind of junky in that their leaves, or their branches die pretty easily. So you have to be careful if you have some of these in your yard. Since the branches die pretty easily, they can create some nasty widowmakers. Yeah, and I guess I should also mention these are not susceptible to the Dutch elm disease, but they do have a pest that does predate them. They're elm leaf miners, I think is what it is, and so oftentimes their leaves will look pretty holey like this at the bottom here. So that's kind of a distinguisher as well. But I think the biggest thing, especially to differentiate this invasive elm from the native elms, is that the leaves are much smaller. Whereas like a native elm, typical leaf size like this big, those Siberian elm leaves are very small. And this was introduced from Asia and used in the US as a windbreak tree. So people grow them in hedgerows, pretty useful for that. But they were pretty aggressive trees. Many of you in the Cedar Rapids area might be familiar with this one. This is the Tree of Heaven. It's not as bad of an issue in the Iowa City area, but I definitely see a lot of it in the Cedar Rapids area. Tree of Heaven, I think the name itself is kind of a joke. It's very aggressive, and a very good way to identify this plant is if you rip it open and you smell it like right away. It produces this really awful smell. Some people like it. It smells kind of like peanut butter, but worse. It's very acrid. It's very strong. It smells bad, and it's extremely, extremely aggressive. Many of you might have this, and I've heard a lot of people have it in their backyards in Cedar Rapids. But it looks pretty similar to sumac. It's got this like pinnately compound leaflet structure like a sumac does. But I think a way to differentiate between sumac, staghorn sumac that's native to Iowa, not to be confused with poison sumac. Staghorn sumac that's native to Iowa is not poisonous. I digress. A good way to differentiate between that is this like tooth here. These Tree of Heaven leaflets have these little teeth at the bottom of their little leaflet structure. Poison sumac do not have this, but otherwise it looks very similar. It kind of has a similar growth habit. It's a smaller tree and or shrub. It also has these leaves these like heart-shaped almost leaf scars, and the seeds look kind of like maple leaves, kind of like helicopter. I'm sure I know there's a more scientific name for that, but they kind of got those like little helicopter seeds there. And then the bark, it's pretty distinct. It's kind of got this like diamond shaped bark. But yeah, I think the best way to identify this is by its smell. If you rip it open, it smells pretty nasty. But yeah, this is an ornamental tree from China. Okay, black locust. Again, this is a native to the U.S., but not specifically to Iowa. It's very aggressive. It is bat habitat, but it is extremely aggressive. So tend to want to control this. It's very thorny. It's got these small thorns, and this like pinnately compound leaf structure as well. Many of you might be familiar with this because locusts are pretty widely cultivated, and a lot of them they're used quite often in like city landscaping. I think City of Coralville has quite a few locusts as their landscaping tree of choice, but the cultivars are usually not super invasive. But black locusts for sure are. Again, they're native regions of Appalachia as well as parts of Arkansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma. They were introduced to the U.S. They were introduced to Iowa because their wood does not rot. So it's really good for fence posts, and it's really good as like a windbreak tree. In the spring, so probably another month or so, you're going to see these really pretty, unfortunately, clusters of white flowers, and they're pretty large. And they're pretty distinct too. You might be able to like look into a woodland and see these really large clusters of leguminous looking flowers. They kind of look like pea flowers, and that's because these are leguminous species. They're in the same family as like red buds and any sort of pea. Actually, crown vetch as well is in the same plant family, but you can kind of distinguish this from like it looks like a pea flower. Yeah, it's very thorny. It's got shaggy bark, and that's why it's habitat for bats, because these bats can kind of crawl underneath that shaggy bark. And it's got these pods that are associated with the pea family. Osage orange. A lot of you might be familiar with the fruit. These are called hedge apples. I think maybe people might be familiar with that name. My mom used to say that they used to be used for mothballs. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but that's what she used to say. I haven't been able to see anything like that online, but so I don't know if that's I don't know if that's true or not. But these were introduced to Iowa for the same reason as black locust. The wood doesn't rot easily, so they were used as fence posts, as windbreak hedgerow trees. They can also be kind of thorny. I don't have a good example here, but the thorns are kind of similar in size to these black locust thorns. The trees themselves, they're very orange colored. It's not the reason why they're called oranges. I think they're called oranges because of the size and shape of the fruits. They're like this big. But the bark itself can look pretty orange, and similar to mulberry, if you cut off like a large branch, it usually exudes like this white latexy substance. And these can also be kind of messy trees as well. They're kind of smaller trees or large bushes. And like mulberries, they can be pretty junky. They've got a lot of dead branches up in there. Yeah, and they've also got this like ovate leaf shape, smooth margin, where they have kind of like a rounded bottom and a pointed top. And then just going to jump into one vine here. Like I said earlier, this is my least favorite plant, so I just thought I'd touch on it because it's very, very badly invasive in Iowa City. Like if you go around to any of the woodlands in Iowa, if they're not managed, they have roundleaf bittersweet. It's a super aggressive plant. It's very hard to manage. I really don't like this plant. So it was introduced from Asia as an ornamental plant, and actually people used to like to use it in their Christmas wreaths. It does have some very attractive looking berries, these little red berries with like the orange shells. And birds love them. They disperse them. So that's why they're all over Iowa City and other parts of Iowa, is because birds really love them. So the vines form a dense mat over forest understories, and it's kind of like kudzu in the way where it's pretty dense, and it also grows over trees as well. Actually, a lot of people call it the Midwest kudzu. Yeah, and so the vines can get huge. This picture here, like, it shows a vine that's like maybe this big. Like they can get really, really big, and they can girdle trees. So you can see this here. This is or a bittersweet vine killing or kind of cutting off the nutrient flow of, I think this is a bitternut hickory. I could be wrong. I think that's what that is. But you can see here, so it's cutting into the heartwood, or like the living layer of that tree, and effectively killing it. So these are really, really bad. The roots are orange. If you pull it from the root, it's very bright orange, and that's a good distinguishing feature as well. And then the leaves, they're round with kind of scalloped edges, and again, they have these red berries in the fall. The smaller vines also kind of have this like speckled look to them, dark brown, like a white speckled look to them. And then the larger vines have more of like a whitish striation to them. If you do pull bittersweet, make sure to bag these, because or put them like hanging up on like a branch or something so it won't fall, because if they touch the ground again, they will resprout. Again, they're very aggressive. And even if you do pull it up, if you don't get all the roots out of the ground, which likely you might not, it'll resprout. So it's pretty nasty. A good way to control this is with chemicals. Triclopyr foliar spray in July is a really good way to control this. You can also cut off the vine and treat the stump with those sponge tip daubers. But if you're committed to hand pulling and they're small enough, you can hand pull away just year after year, keep coming back. One aspect about these two is that they are encouraged by fire. So if you put fire through an area with bittersweet, they will come back in stronger numbers, unfortunately. So if you have a place with bittersweet invasion, you probably don't want to put fire there. Yeah, that's bittersweet. And then I'll just if we have enough time, how are we doing on time?
About 15 minutes.
Okay, cool. I'll run pretty quickly through herbaceous plants then, and that'll be the last bit of my presentation here. So we're going to just kind of go through like common life strategies of the invasive plants that we see here in Iowa. And then I'll give some quick examples. So we have first annual and biennial plants, so plants that only live for a year or live for 2 years, kind of like I was describing earlier. So you have garlic mustard, you have Dame's rocket. So Dame's rocket also kind of coming up right now in the woodlands as well. They're usually pink or white, but they can be hard to distinguish between there's a native species called phlox, prairie phlox, I think it is. Prairie phlox is native. It's a really nice flower. It's got 5 petals. Dame's rocket, the invasive aggressive species, only has 4. So that's a really good distinguishing feature of it. It only has 4 petals. So if you see it, if you see a really nice, pretty white and purple flower with 4 petals, pull it, please. It's really aggressive. Common mullein. This is a biennial plant. A lot of people might know this as it's a home remedy for if you're sick. I think it helps clear your sinuses. Some people use it as tea. I've heard people smoke it sometimes too to help with sickness. I don't know about that, but people use it in tea a lot. It's also called lamb's ear. The leaves are extremely soft. It's kind of nice to feel if you feel that they're very, very soft leaves. They're very hairy. So this is a biennial plant as well, and it's got this like spadix at the top here with the yellow flowers. You have curly dock. These are really annoying because in the fall they form these like spiky balls and they'll stick to you. I think they were actually the inspiration for Velcro because they've got these tiny little hooks on the end that will hook to your clothes, and they're kind of hard to pull off. They don't really hurt, but they're just, if you get into them, they're kind of hard to pull off. But they've got these massive leaves, and I think they're biennial as well. So yeah, good to control these. And then you've got poison parsnip here at the bottom. These are yellow flowers with they call it an umbel feature, so almost kind of like a rounded top with a bunch of little florets at the top. Poison parsnip, it's native, but it's aggressive, and it also has in its sap phototoxic chemicals. So if it gets on your skin and that sap on your skin is exposed to direct sunlight, it'll form these pretty nasty blisters that they can hurt when they pop, and they also like leave a scar for a while. So cover up if you're dealing with these, and I wouldn't recommend mowing. I would recommend using clippers or loppers to remove these, but just make sure you're covering up and washing off with water afterwards. And maybe don't do this on a sunny day when you're dealing with these. But yeah, so annual biennial plants, you can hand pull them, removing the roots, or mow them, or clip the seed heads off to remove that to stop any more seeds from getting into the environment. If you're controlling with chemicals, a foliar spray of glyphosate or broadleaf specific herbicide will work. So aminopyrrolid, the brand name for that is Milestone. People usually use Milestone. That's a pretty expensive one though. Triclopyr also works. And fire. Fire is a really good way to kill a lot of these and kind of reduce spread. Rhizomatous plants, I talked a little bit about this before. Rhizomatous plants are like your turf grass or your reed canary grass. They spread with their roots. Spread via rootstocks or rhizomes. Again, they're hard to control because of that. So methods to kill these are foliar spraying of herbicides, so glyphosate, aminopyrrolid / Milestone, or triclopyr. Or if it's a grass, you could use your clethodim. Clethodim will not work with these two. Same with triclopyr and aminopyrrolid. Those will not work on grass, but they will work with crown vetch and Canada thistle. Tarping also works for a season. If you put a tarp out over an outbreak, you can kill those. And you can also use cultural or biological control. So burning usually helps. As far as biological control goes, as far as pests go, not super sure. But you can plant trees to shade out reed canary grass. But yeah, fire, shading out reed canary grass, those work. So again, this is Canada thistle. This is different from some other types of thistle. This spreads rhizomously. Other types of thistle, like sow thistle, musk thistle, bull thistle, those are um, annual or biennial plants. So you can just remove the seed heads with those. But Canada thistle is different. It spreads rhizomously. It's actually introduced from Asia. It's not from Canada. I don't know why it's called Canada thistle. I'm sure there's a good reason. I should probably look into that. But usually triclopyr or milestone is a good way to control these. Same with crown vetch. Yeah, triclopyr or milestone. And then we're going to just quickly go over integrated pest management. So this is a good link. The EPA kind of talks about integrated pest management, and this is basically to reduce herbicide intolerance, I guess, or resistance, herbicide resistance. You see this a lot with glyphosate. People overuse glyphosate, and then those plants get resistance to herbicide. So if you have a pest that you are dealing with, you need to develop a combination of strategies to deal with this so it's not resistant to any of those combinations, specifically herbicide if you're using that type of control. Use all different types of methods that you can come up with if applicable. Use different types of herbicide if you need to use herbicide as your control. You can go onto this EPA website to just kind of give you some suggestions on how to come up with an integrated pest management plan. IPM is for short. And just an example of this, Neil Smith has come up with a really interesting strategy to deal with bush clover. I think it's Asiatic bush clover. They have these dogs that are trained onto the scent of bush clover. So they will send out these dogs. These dogs will find the bush clover, and then they will, the people will come after them and like pull them or spray them or the herbicide or whatever. But I just found that really interesting, so I wanted to mention that. And then if you are interested in using herbicide, I did not go, there's a ton of herbicides out there that you can use. I did not go over all of them. You can go to the EPA website here. And they've got a good reference for the types of herbicides and their uses and some recommendations of brands. You can also, if you're in the Midwest, you can use Midwest Invasives Plant Control Database, or MIPN for short. This is really great if you have a species that you don't know how to control. They have a full list of all the different ways you can control them. This is a very, very valuable resource. Highly recommend it. And they also have, if you're interested in control, using herbicide as control, they have some brand recommendations. These are just some good, like unbiased sources of, if you're looking into types of herbicide, of what kind of brands you can get. Yes. And then, ID and control resources. I'll just run through these really quick. If you need help IDing plants, you've got these apps, iNaturalist, Seek, PlantNet, really, really useful. I wouldn't say they're 100% accurate all the time, but if you need a quick ID, they're really useful. We use it a lot in the field. If we're just interested to know in knowing what kind of plant is what. There's also some books if you're more into books. You've got Invasive Plants of the Upper Midwest by Elizabeth Sarafita, and then Invasive Plants Guide to Identification by Sylvia Kaufman. Those are pretty good. Also, resources online for controlling invasives. You have, again, that Midwest Invasive Species Plant Network. Penn State Extension, this is a really good resource for different types of plant control. And then most state university extensions websites like Iowa State Extension, they've got a lot of good information on there, as well as like DNR. There's like, every state has like a noxious plant list, and so they also have ways for you to control those noxious plants. And then books, this is basically like the Restorationist Bible here, the Tall Grass Restoration Handbook. We have a copy in the office. This is by Stephen Packard and Connie Mittel. This is a really good book if you're interested in it. Okay, and that's my presentation. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Erin. I'll jump into, we did have something we wanted to share briefly as a resource that's available. I'm going to drop it in the chat here. But WFAN, we're part of a cohort that's it's the CoLorn cohort, which is several different universities working together on a NOAA project. But with that, we can get funding for community action grants. So we have one currently focused on the Cedar River watershed. So if you live in that eastern part of Iowa, you are likely eligible to participate in this program. So we're looking at connecting with landowners that would like to know a little more about the conservation opportunities on their land. So if you click on that link there too, there's information around this. So participants will get a free facilitated agricultural conservation planning framework session. So you'll have somebody walk you through the results of mapping your farmland and help you identify some potential conservation opportunities. And we have a small stipend available to help fund whatever activity you want to take on that land. So please check it out. Feel free to share with your friends if you think you've got other folks that would be eligible. And we'll be continuing to promote this. This is open throughout the year, this year, so this won't be going away. But I want to toss it back to Olivia to give us a little time for questions. I can hang on a couple extra minutes too, seeing as uh, there might be some more questions.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Erin, for your presentation. And we are opening it up for questions. We have about 5 minutes left, so if anybody has any, you can turn on your mics, should be able to do that and ask Erin a question speaking, or you can, of course, put it in the chat as well if you don't want to turn your mic on.
And it looks like, Joe, you've got a question on how do we tackle Canadian thistle. So vinegar's not cutting it, and feed fabric doesn't really slow it down too much.
That's a very good question. Honestly, I don't have an answer for you there. We primarily use herbicide to control Canada thistle. I'm sorry you're dealing with that. Weed fabric, so it's not, but little doesn't kill it. Yeah. I would highly recommend if you haven't already looking at Midwest Invasive Species Plant Network. Maybe they'll have some suggestions for organic methods of controlling it. But yeah, I'm sorry. I cannot give you any recommendations on that. But thanks for your question.
Thank you.
Can you see the chat, Erin?
Yes, I can. Yeah. So recommendations for poison parsnips. Herbicide on a cloudy day. I've heard burning parsnips can be dangerous because it releases poisonous properties. Yeah. So yes, we can use herbicide any day, cloudy or sunny. Also, if you don't want to use, I guess, well, so we use triclopyr or glyphosate for poison parsnip if you want to use chemicals to control it. If you don't want to use chemicals, using loppers or clippers are a really good method to control it. I wouldn't really recommend mowing. I have used brush cutters before to kill a huge patch of poison parsnip, but I wouldn't recommend doing that unless you're like really, really covered up and want to risk it. I didn't get any blisters on me, but like I wouldn't necessarily recommend that method. You can also pull it by the root too. There's specifically like parsnip shovels that you can use to dig up the root. But yeah, I mean, if you want to use herbicide, you can use that on the cloudy day. Just make sure that it's not raining and that it's not going to be raining 2 hours after you complete your herbicide. So give it a couple hours, give your herbicide a couple hours to kind of dry up and soak into the plant. Yeah.
I'm also going to drop an evaluation survey in the chat. We'll include this in our follow-up email too, but
Yeah, you know what? I was debating on whether to talk about stiltgrass. So we deal with stiltgrass. It's pretty bad in Iowa City. So I've heard that people will, if you use glyphosate or Roundup, like for a couple of years, like a couple times per year for like 2 years, that's a pretty effective way to kill it. We use pre-emergent, a mixture of pre-emergent chemical, like it's a granular chemical, and then or granular herbicide, and then clethodim, grass selective specifically. You can mow it, but it's rhizomatous, so you can mow it to reduce the seed head, but it'll still grow. So you could maybe tarp it But yes, Japanese grass, still grass is definitely in Iowa, and it's a problem, unfortunately.
Well, I guess I'll ask for one that I've got personally. So I got 4 barberries in the front yard I'm gonna get out this weekend. Would you recommend trying to dig them out or like lop it off and then do the herbicide on top?
Yeah, I've never tried digging it out, but if you can get the root fully out, go for it. Definitely. Yeah,
Okay.
especially if you don't want to use herbicide. Like that's probably a good way to remove it without using herbicide for sure. It'll probably be
Okay.
harder, but yeah, definitely. I would recommend that if you don't want to use herbicide. Oh, and then I see somebody in the chat recommended a talk on organic cannabis thistle management. Thank you. I'll have to look into that.
What is a good substitute for like burning bush or other ornamentals that people plant that would be native in its place? I'm also
Okay.
speaking personally because I have a burning bush in my backyard that I'm trying to figure out what to place it with.
Sure. There's a lot of really good native bush alternatives. Elderberry is a good one. Aronia berry or chokecherry. Let's see. Serviceberry is kind of a small tree shrub. Those are all like edible. I guess chokecherry is it's pretty tart. It's got a lot of tannins in it, but those are all edible alternatives, and the birds really like them too. Um, there's kind of ornamental species of dogwood that aren't really invasive or aggressive like gray dogwood. So there's like red osier dogwood, pagoda dogwood. There's a species in southern Illinois. It's like big flowering dogwood or something like that. It's really pretty. I'm not sure how well it grows in Iowa, but if you can get a cultivar like that, it's really pretty. But those are some good shrubs. I think Iowa DNR Forestry also has some good resource or good recommendations for that as well.
All right, I think we are at time, so I want to respect Erin's time. But we will be sharing out the recording of this as well as the slide deck as a PDF. We'll be putting it up on our website. So thank you all for joining today. Olivia, any last thoughts before people go?
No, yeah, just thank you. I hope everyone learned a lot. As Jennifer mentioned, we will have this slide deck out and be sharing the recording and the slides. We should have it up on our WFAN resources page in PDF format so that you're able to access it later for future reference. And I know I will be. So thank you so much, Erin, for your time.
Thank you.